People often believe the world works the way it is supposed to work, that hard work gets noticed, that honesty builds trust, that being good at your job is enough, that fairness is the default and unfairness is the exception. And then something happens. Someone less talented gets promoted over them. A colleague takes credit for their idea in a meeting and nothing is said. A person they trusted uses something they shared in confidence against them. A rival they underestimated outmaneuvers them completely. And they are left standing there, confused, wondering how someone like that ended up ahead of someone like them. The answer is not that the world is broken. The answer is that the world runs on a set of rules that nobody formally teaches you. Rules about power, about how it is gained, how it is protected, how it is taken, and how it is lost. And the people who understand those rules, even if they would never admit to knowing them, have an enormous advantage over the people who do not. Robert Greene spent years reading history, biography, and the records of courts, wars, negotiations, and betrayals going back thousands of years. And what he found was that beneath the surface of every era and every culture, the same patterns kept appearing. The same moves, the same mistakes, the same dynamics playing out again and again, regardless of the century or the setting. He wrote the 48 Laws of Power to name those patterns. This is not a comfortable book. It is not supposed to be. Some of what Greene describes will make you uneasy. Some of it will make you think of people you know. Some of it will make you think of things you have done or had done to you, and finally understand why they happened. But once you see these patterns, you cannot unsee them, and that is the point. Welcome to Bookmark, where we explain the most valuable books in the simplest way possible, whether you are commuting, working out, or just going about your day. Just press play, and we make sure the knowledge finds you, not the other way around. Today we are covering the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Before we go any further, something worth saying clearly at the start. This book is not a manual for becoming a villain. It is not a guide to manipulating people for personal gain. Greene himself says that the laws can be used defensively just as powerfully as offensively. Understanding how power works is not the same as choosing to weaponize it, but not understanding it leaves you vulnerable to those who do. Greene draws on figures ranging from Napoleon to Queen Elizabeth, to Machiavelli to Sun Tzu, to ordinary people caught in extraordinary situations. His method is historical and observational. He is not telling you what should be true. He is showing you what has always been true across cultures and centuries about how human beings actually behave when power is at stake. The 48 laws cover an enormous range of ideas. Rather than going through each one in sequence, we are going to take you through 7 themes that organize the entire book. 7 lenses through which all 48 laws can be understood. Because once you understand the themes, the individual laws become expressions of something much larger and much more useful. Those themes are the management of appearances, the intelligence of courts and politics, the use of information and timing, the understanding of human nature, the logic of the long game, the laws of seduction and influence, and finally, the moral question that sits at the center of everything Greene wrote. One more thing before we begin. This is a long and complete walkthrough of all 48 laws. If you want to listen in one sitting, the script is built to take you through from start to finish without losing the thread. If you would rather listen in sessions, the 7 themes are each self-contained. You can stop at the end of any theme and come back later without losing anything. The themes are designed as re-entry points, not just chapter headings. So listen however works for you. The knowledge will be here either way. Each theme will change the way you see something you thought you already understood. So let us begin at the very foundation of everything Greene teaches. Robert Greene opens the book with an observation so simple it sounds obvious, and yet most people spend their entire lives ignoring it. People do not respond to reality. They respond to what they perceive, not what you actually are, not what you have actually done, not what your intentions actually were, what they see, what they believe, what story they have constructed about you in their minds. This is uncomfortable to accept because we all want to believe that reality will eventually speak for itself. That good work will be recognized, that character will be seen, that truth will surface. And sometimes it does. But in the arena of power, appearances are not decoration. They are the game itself. Greene illustrates this with Louis XIV of France, one of the most powerful rulers in European history. Louis understood something fundamental, that the theater of power was as important as power itself. He built Versailles not merely as a palace, but as a stage. Every detail of court life, the ceremonies, the rituals, the carefully choreographed processions, was designed to project an image of absolute, unquestioned majesty. He controlled how he was seen so completely that his image became inseparable from his authority. Was Louis the most intelligent person in France? Almost certainly not. Was he the most capable administrator? Debatable. But was he, in the perception of everyone around him, the undisputed center of all power and prestige? Without question. That is what Greene means when he writes Law 6, court attention at all cost. In any environment where human beings compete for resources, position, or influence, visibility matters. The person who is noticed, talked about, and remembered has an advantage over the person who is excellent but invisible. This does not mean being loud or vulgar or desperate. It means understanding that obscurity is its own kind of weakness, and that the ability to draw and hold attention is itself a form of power. But there is a specific way to court attention that Greene considers most powerful, and it runs counter to most people's instincts. Law 37. Create compelling spectacles. Striking images and memorable gestures carry an emotional power that words and arguments rarely achieve. The person who understands how to create a moment, a visual or theatrical event that lodges in the memory and the imagination, operates at a level of influence that pure logic cannot reach. Think about the great communicators and leaders throughout history. They did not simply make arguments. They created images, moments, scenes that people remembered and talked about long after the practical details had faded. The speech on the steps, the symbolic gesture at the right moment, the act so unexpected and so perfectly calibrated to its audience that it shifted the emotional atmosphere of an entire situation. This is not manipulation in any crude sense. It is an understanding of how human beings actually process and retain experience. We remember feelings more reliably than facts. We remember images more reliably than arguments. The person who can create a memorable image rather than simply delivering information speaks to a deeper level of human attention. Appearances cut both ways, and this is where Greene's thinking gets particularly sharp. Law 1 is this: never outshine the master. This is the first law in the book for a reason. It is also the law that most ambitious, talented people violate most often and most painfully. Greene tells the story of Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister to Louis XIV. Fouquet was brilliant, cultured, and enormously wealthy. He threw a party at his chateau that was so magnificent, so lavish, so clearly superior to anything the king himself could produce, that Louis had him arrested 3 weeks later. Fouquet spent the rest of his life in prison. He had committed the most dangerous error in the court of power. He had made the person above him feel diminished. The lesson is not that you should hide your talent. The lesson is that you should always be aware of where you stand in relation to the people who hold power over your situation. Making your superior look brilliant by extension of your contributions is a completely different thing from making them look inadequate by comparison. The most successful people in competitive environments have always understood this instinctively. They make the person above them look good. They take pride in their own work without needing to be seen as better than the person they report to. And in doing so, they earn something far more valuable than a single moment of recognition. They earn the trust and sponsorship of someone who can open doors that talent alone cannot. Connected to appearances is something even more fundamental, something that Greene returns to again and again throughout the book as one of the most reliable sources of power available to anyone. The carefully constructed reputation. Law 5 says this: so much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Greene writes that reputation is the cornerstone of power. It can be built and it can be destroyed. And the people who understand this protect it with the same ferocity they would protect anything else of great value. A strong reputation precedes you into every room. It shapes how people interpret your actions before you take them. It gives your words weight before you speak. It means that when something ambiguous happens, people fill in the gaps in your favor rather than against you. And a damaged reputation does the opposite. It follows you into every room. It poisons interpretations. It means that even good work gets viewed with suspicion. And once it is badly damaged, it takes an enormous amount of consistent effort over a long period of time to rebuild. Greene's prescription is deliberate and active reputation management, not in the cheap public relations sense, but in the sense of understanding what you want to be known for, behaving consistently in ways that reinforce that image, and being willing to defend that reputation decisively when it is attacked. There is a law connected to reputation that most people find immediately counterintuitive when they first encounter it. Law 25. Recreate yourself. Do not accept the identity that others assign you. The most powerful people throughout history have understood that identity is not fixed. It is something that can be consciously shaped, rebuilt, and projected. Greene points to Napoleon, who was born to a miner family on a small island, spoke French with a foreign accent, and was dismissed by many of his early military superiors. He understood from the beginning that to achieve what he intended to achieve, he would need to become something that the world did not currently see when it looked at him. He created a persona, a legend, an image of destiny and greatness that he inhabited so fully and so consistently that eventually the world had no choice but to accept it. This is not about pretending to be something you are not. It is about understanding that the version of yourself the world currently sees was partly shaped by accident, by where you were born, how you were raised, what happened to you, and that you have far more agency over that image than most people ever exercise. The person who takes conscious control of how they present themselves, what they emphasize, what they leave in shadow, what narrative they allow to attach to their name, is operating at a level of intentionality that most people around them are not. That is the world of appearances. The perception game, the first and most visible layer of everything Greene teaches. But perception is only sustainable if it is backed by something structural. And that structure lives inside the courts, the political environments, the webs of relationship and hierarchy that exist in every human group on Earth. Every organization, every company, every government, every social group is a court. It does not matter whether you call it a workplace or a family or a neighborhood. Wherever human beings gather in groups with any kind of hierarchy or shared resources, the dynamics of court politics emerge. The alliances and factions, the favorites and the outcasts, the people who seem to have no power but who influence everything, the people with impressive titles who are bypassed in every real decision. Robert Greene studied the actual courts of history, the Italian Renaissance courts, the French royal court, the courts of ancient China and Rome, because those environments made the dynamics of power visible in ways that modern institutions obscure. The stakes were life and death. The maneuvering was therefore explicit. The lessons are permanent. Law 3 says this: conceal your intentions. Most people, especially those who pride themselves on honesty and directness, find this idea uncomfortable. But Greene is not advising deception as a virtue. He is observing something about human nature that is simply true. People who reveal their intentions too early, too clearly, too completely, give others the information they need to block, undermine, or co-opt those intentions before they can be realized. Think about something as simple as a negotiation. The person who walks in and immediately signals how badly they want something has already lost significant leverage. The person who maintains real ambiguity about their alternatives, their urgency, their true priorities, retains the ability to maneuver. Greene illustrates this with the idea of decoys and red herrings. Not elaborate deceptions, but the simple practical act of not announcing your moves before you make them. Of allowing people to believe you are focused on one thing while quietly advancing on another. This is not dishonesty in any meaningful sense. It is the recognition that in competitive environments, broadcasting your plans is the same as giving them to your opponents. Law 4 follows directly from this. Always say less than necessary. When you speak more than the situation requires, you reveal more than you intended. You fill silences that would have served you better empty. You give away information, signal uncertainty, expose your thinking before it has fully formed. The most commanding presences in any room are rarely the ones talking most. They are the ones who speak deliberately, who leave space around their words, who do not feel the need to fill every silence. Silence is uncomfortable, and most people, when faced with silence, rush to fill it. Watching which information comes out when someone is made uncomfortable by quiet is itself a significant source of intelligence. There is also a psychological dimension to speaking less. When you say less, what you do say carries more weight. Scarcity creates value in words just as in any other commodity. The person who is precise and measured in their speech is listened to more carefully than the person who provides a constant stream of commentary. Law 7. Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. This law makes people uncomfortable when they first read it, but Greene is not advocating theft of credit in the crude sense. He is making a deeper observation about how power accumulates. The people at the highest levels of any organization, government, or institution are almost never doing the most detailed or technical work themselves. They are directing, synthesizing, deciding, and presenting. They understand that the person who controls the outcome and presents it carries the authority, regardless of who did the individual components. This is why delegation is not laziness at senior levels. It is a form of intelligence, the ability to identify talent, deploy it effectively, synthesize the results, and take responsibility for the whole is itself a significant skill. The law is not about stealing credit from individuals who deserve it. It is about understanding that the person who holds the position of authority must actively occupy that position, or someone else will fill the space. Law 9. Win through your actions, never through argument. Argument, Greene observes, almost never changes minds. It changes positions. The person who loses an argument publicly usually retreats to defend their original position more firmly in private. The person who wins an argument publicly has often made an enemy. The reason is that argument, particularly in front of witnesses, makes the losing party feel publicly diminished. And people who feel publicly diminished look for ways to recover their sense of standing. Those ways rarely involve acknowledging that the other person was right. What actually changes minds and shifts allegiances is demonstration. Action, results. The person who shows rather than argues operates in a register that bypasses the ego and speaks directly to evidence. When you demonstrate something through what you do, the other person does not feel defeated. They simply see something that works, and there is no shame in being persuaded by reality. Law 8. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. The person who always goes to others is, in the logic of power dynamics, in a subordinate position. The person who causes others to come to them occupies the position of authority, even if no formal authority exists. This is not about being passive or inaccessible. It is about understanding the psychology of position. When you maneuver a situation so that the other party approaches you, several things change. You have more information about their intentions, you have more control over the setting and the timing, and the simple act of being sought out rather than seeking out shifts the perceived balance of power in your favor. The bait Greene refers to as anything that creates a real motivation for the other party to come to you. A resource they want, an opportunity they need, an expertise only you can provide. The person who makes themselves truly valuable to others has a natural gravitational pull that requires no manipulation whatsoever. Law 2. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. Friends, Greene argues, are dangerous precisely because of the trust you extend to them. They have access to your vulnerabilities. They know your insecurities. They understand your weaknesses. And when a friendship breaks down, as they sometimes do, especially in competitive environments where resources are scarce and stakes are high, That knowledge becomes a weapon in the hands of someone who now has both the information and the motivation to use it. Former friends are often more dangerous than enemies who were always enemies. But enemies, if managed carefully, can be made useful. A known enemy keeps you sharp. Their opposition forces you to articulate and defend your positions. Turning an enemy into an ally, when it can be done, creates loyalty of a different and often stronger kind than friendship, because it is built on mutual interest rather than affection. Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. Independence is the goal most people want for themselves. But in terms of accumulating and holding power, Greene argues that creating dependency in others is one of the most durable sources of security available. The person who is simply good at their job can be replaced by someone else who is good at the same job. The person who holds unique knowledge, unique relationships, unique access, or who has positioned themselves as the irreplaceable link in a chain that others depend on, occupies a position that is structurally secure in a way that performance alone cannot provide. Think about the person in any organization who seems to have less formal authority than their actual influence suggests. Quite often, they have made themselves the holder of something others need: information, relationships, institutional memory, access to someone important. The formal hierarchy does not capture the real map of dependency, and it is the real map that determines where power actually lives. Law 12. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your opponent. One act of honesty or unexpected generosity placed correctly can create a degree of goodwill that dissolves suspicion and opens access that would otherwise have been defended. This is not about being dishonest the rest of the time. It is about understanding that the strategic use of real openness, revealing something true about yourself, offering something of actual value without asking for anything in return, creates a psychological dynamic that most people find disarming. The salesperson who admits a real flaw in their product, the negotiator who acknowledges a legitimate point from the other side, the leader who takes honest responsibility for a mistake. These moments of honesty are so unexpected in environments where people assume everyone is managing their image that they stand out dramatically and create trust out of proportion to the act itself. Law 13. When asking for help, appeal to self-interest, never to mercy or gratitude. Most people, when they need something from someone, appeal to the relationship, to past favors, to the other person's goodness, to loyalty or friendship or moral obligation. And most of the time, this approach is less effective than it could be, because goodness, mercy, and gratitude are unpredictable motivators. They compete with 100 other demands on a person's attention and goodwill. Self-interest, on the other hand, is reliable. When you can show someone clearly how helping you serves something they already want, the calculation becomes simple. You are not asking for a favor. You are offering an opportunity. And opportunities get taken up far more reliably than appeals to virtue. This does not require cynicism about people's motivations. It simply requires the intellectual discipline to understand what others actually want and to frame your request in relation to that, rather than in relation to your own need. Law 20. Do not commit to anyone. This is one of the most strategically important laws in the book, and one of the most frequently violated by people who mistake loyalty for strength. By refusing to commit to any single faction, alliance, or position prematurely, the strategically intelligent person preserves optionality. They remain useful to multiple parties. They cannot be trapped by commitments made before all the information was available. And they maintain the flexibility to move as circumstances change. This is not the same as being unreliable or untrustworthy. It is about understanding the difference between the commitments that serve you and the ones that limit you. The most powerful people in any room are rarely those who have committed loudest and earliest. They are the ones who have maintained enough strategic ambiguity to remain relevant regardless of how the situation develops. Greene observes that the person who commits too early, who declares their allegiance before the outcome is clear, almost always ends up on the losing side at some point. Not because they chose poorly, but because they chose permanently when the situation called for flexibility. Law 42. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will scatter. In any group, movement, or organization, there is almost always one person whose removal or discrediting would cause the entire structure to collapse. Not because the others are weak, but because the coherence of the group depends on that central figure. The strategist who understands this does not waste energy on the periphery of an opposing force. They identify the single point of structural dependency and direct everything toward that point. This law operates in reverse as well. The person who understands it about their own position, who recognizes that they may be the shepherd of a group that depends on their presence, understands both the power that position carries and the vulnerability it creates. They take steps to build resilience into their network so that their absence or removal does not produce the collapse that their opponents might be hoping for. That is the intelligence of courts. The web of relationships, dependencies, and dynamics that exists in every human group. The person who navigates it well moves through competitive environments with a fluency that looks almost effortless to those who have never studied the map. But court intelligence alone is not enough. The other great lever of power is something more subtle and more powerful than any single relationship or alliance. It is information, and it is timing. The laws of appearances told us how to manage what others see. The laws of courts told us how to navigate the relationships around us. This theme is about something different. It is about knowing things others do not know, and about acting when the moment is right rather than when the feeling is urgent. These two things, information and timing, are where some of the most powerful historical figures built their most decisive advantages. And they are the areas where most people are weakest because both require a discipline of patience that modern life actively erodes. Robert Greene is obsessed with information. Not data in the abstract sense, but knowledge of the specific situation, the specific people, their specific desires, fears, insecurities, and motivations. Law 14. Pose as a friend, work as a spy. This law sounds sinister and is often misread as an instruction in deception. But what Greene is actually describing is something more fundamental: the importance of truly understanding the people around you. In any competitive environment, the person who understands what others actually want, what they actually fear, what they actually value, as opposed to what they say they want or what they are supposed to value, has an enormous informational advantage. Most people do not invest in this kind of understanding. They operate on assumptions. They project their own values onto others. They mistake what people say for what they mean. And they are repeatedly surprised by the decisions others make. The person who asks questions, listens carefully, pays attention to what is not said as much as what is, and remembers what they learn about the people around them, does not need to manipulate anyone. They simply understand the environment they are operating in with far greater clarity than most people around them. Law 21. Play a sucker to catch a sucker. Seem dumber than your mark. This is one of the most counterintuitive ideas in the book, and also one of the most historically documented. The person who appears less intelligent, less informed, or less capable than they actually are, gives the other party a false sense of security. That false security leads to underestimation, and underestimation leads to exposure. The person who believes they are the smartest in the room becomes careless. They reveal more than they intended. They take risks they would not otherwise take. They make moves without taking the precautions they would take if they considered you a real threat. Some of history's most effective strategists made extensive use of this principle. They cultivated an image of being unremarkable, confused, or less capable than their opponents believed. And then, at the critical moment, the gap between the perceived threat level and the actual capability became their most decisive advantage. Law 19. Know who you are dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person. Not everyone reacts to the same provocation in the same way. Not everyone can be handled with the same approach. One of the most costly mistakes in competitive environments is treating everyone as though they respond to the same logic, the same incentives, the same pressures. Some people, if you push them, will step back and reconsider. Others will dig in and fight regardless of the cost to themselves. Some people are so sensitive to perceived insult that they will sacrifice enormous practical advantage in order to defend their sense of dignity. Others are entirely pragmatic and have almost no ego investment in any particular outcome. The person who takes the time to truly understand who they are dealing with before engaging, before provoking, before making any move that might elicit a response, avoids an enormous number of the conflicts that arise simply from the mistake of assuming everyone else is like you. Law 35. Master the art of timing. Everything in the world of power is connected to timing. The same action taken at the right moment can be decisive. Taken at the wrong moment, it can be catastrophic. Greene uses the careers of historical figures who rose and fell on their ability to read the moment correctly. Bismarck, the German statesman, was a master of timing. He knew when to press, when to wait, when to act decisively, and when to appear patient. He created the modern German state not through superior force, but through an almost uncanny ability to act at exactly the right moment when circumstances aligned in his favor. Most people operate at one of two extremes. They act too early before the conditions are ready and waste their efforts against resistance that would have dissolved on its own. Or they wait too long, hoping for a perfect moment that never comes and watch the window close. Timing is not passive. It is an active discipline. It requires truly understanding the current situation, where momentum is flowing, what pressures are building, what is about to change. And it requires the discipline to wait when waiting is the correct move, even when impatience is screaming at you to do something. Law 22. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power. When you are weaker than the force opposing you, fighting directly is almost always wrong. Retreat is not defeat. It is a strategic repositioning that preserves your resources, denies your opponent the decisive victory they were looking for, and buys you the time to change the conditions of the conflict. Greene points to the way water behaves. It does not fight the rock. It flows around it. And over time, the rock yields to the water, not because the water was stronger in any single moment, but because it never exhausted itself in a direct confrontation it could not win. In human terms, this means that the person who is currently in a weaker position should focus on surviving, learning, adapting, and waiting for conditions to change, rather than spending their resources in a confrontation they cannot win. The temporary appearance of submission is infinitely preferable to the actual cost of a battle fought before the time is right. Law 31. Control the options. Get others to play with the cards you deal. This law is about the architecture of choice. When you control which options are available to others, you control the outcome, even if you never directly control their decision. Think about how masterful negotiators structure deals. They do not simply present their preferred outcome and hope the other side agrees. They construct the landscape of options in a way that makes their preferred outcome the most attractive available choice. Not by forcing anything, by engineering the conditions under which a free choice produces the result they wanted. This is one of the most sophisticated ideas in the book because it operates invisibly. The person on the receiving end believes they are making an independent decision. And they are. But the options they are choosing between were designed by someone else. Understanding this as a defensive concept is equally important. When you recognize that the options being presented to you were designed by someone with their own agenda, you can ask the question that most people never think to ask. Who constructed these choices, and what outcome does that architecture serve? Law 38. Think as you like, but behave like others. If you hold opinions or views that differ significantly from those around you, expressing them freely in most environments is a path toward isolation and suspicion. The person who insists on making their unconventional thinking visible invites resistance and antagonism from people who feel implicitly criticized by any departure from consensus. The strategically intelligent person understands the difference between internal thinking and external behavior. They think freely. They explore unconventional ideas. They question the assumptions that others hold unexamined. But they choose carefully when and how to express those ideas, and to whom, rather than treating every room as an appropriate venue for every thought. This is not about dishonesty or cowardice. It is about understanding that the goal is not to express yourself, but to achieve something. And achieving something often requires the ability to move comfortably within the conventions of the environment you are operating in, even when your private thinking has moved well beyond them. Law 32. Play to people's fantasies. Reality, Greene writes, is difficult and painful. People want relief from it. They want to believe that the complicated can be made simple, that the distant is reachable, that the person standing in front of them is the one who can deliver what they have always been looking for. The person who understands what others fantasize about, what vision of their own life they carry that reality has not yet delivered, and who can speak to that fantasy, draws an almost irresistible kind of attention and loyalty. This is why certain leaders inspire extraordinary devotion despite mediocre practical performance. This is why certain products sell on aspiration rather than function. This is why certain relationships have a power that logic cannot explain. Somebody found the fantasy and spoke directly to it. The defensive lesson is equally important. When you recognize that someone is speaking directly to your fantasy, that they are offering exactly what you have always wanted in terms that feel almost too perfect, that recognition is worth examining carefully. Not with cynicism, but with awareness. So far, we have covered how to manage what people see, how to navigate the webs of relationship and hierarchy around you, and how to use information and timing as strategic tools. These are the outer layers of Greene's framework, but beneath all of them is something more fundamental, something that determines whether any tactic or strategy will work in any situation. A real, unsentimental understanding of human nature itself. Robert Greene believes, and the 48 Laws are built on this belief, that human beings are fundamentally consistent. Not that individuals are predictable in every way, but that the underlying drives, the desires and fears and vanities and insecurities that motivate human behavior, are remarkably stable across time, culture, and circumstance. The person who understands those drives, who has taken the time to seriously study what people actually want, and what they actually fear rather than what they say they want, and what they claim to fear, operates with a significant advantage in almost every human interaction. Law 17. Keep others in suspended terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability. Predictability in the world of power is a weakness. When others can anticipate your every move, they can prepare for it, counter it, neutralize it. The person who always reacts the same way to the same provocation is easy to manage. The person whose responses are not entirely predictable is far harder to deal with, because you cannot design a strategy around someone whose next move is not certain. This is not about being chaotic or erratic. It is about the deliberate preservation of strategic unpredictability. Keeping a degree of mystery around yourself, not revealing the full logic behind your decisions, occasionally acting in ways that confound expectations without breaking trust. Some of the most powerful historical figures had this quality. People could not quite pin them down, could not quite predict them, and that uncertainty alone generated a kind of respect that certainty never produces. Law 16. Use absence to increase respect and honor. Presence, Greene argues, diminishes perception. The more you are seen, the more ordinary you become. Familiarity erodes the sense of mystery and significance that makes people pay attention. The person who is always available, always visible, always reachable, removes the sense of scarcity that creates value. But the person who is sometimes absent, sometimes unreachable, sometimes withholds their presence, creates a gap. And gaps get filled with imagination, which is almost always more generous than reality. This is why some of the most powerful leaders throughout history were not the most visible ones. Their occasional appearances were events. Their absences were felt. And the gap between expectation and presence created an almost magnetic pull toward them when they chose to be seen. Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. This law is the balance to Law 16, and the tension between them is worth sitting with. Absence creates value, but isolation creates vulnerability. The person who withdraws completely, who cuts themselves off from information, from allies, from the pulse of what is happening around them, becomes vulnerable in a different way. Power requires connection. It requires allies. It requires the flow of information that only comes from being embedded in a network of relationships. The hermit may be safe from the politics of the court, but they are also irrelevant to it, and irrelevance is its own kind of defeat. Law 10. Infection. Avoid the unhappy and the unlucky. This is possibly the most emotionally confronting law in the entire book, because it asks you to make a calculation that feels cruel. Greene's observation is this: emotions and circumstances are contagious. The person who is perpetually unlucky, perpetually in crisis, perpetually aggrieved, tends to spread those conditions to the people around them, not through any malicious intent. Simply because crisis attracts crisis, and the person standing close to a burning building is at real risk of being burned. This is not an instruction to abandon people who are struggling or to value only those who are succeeding. It is an observation about the environments you choose to be close to and the degree to which you allow others' chaos to become your own. The law also has a positive dimension that is easy to miss. Just as dysfunction is contagious, so is success, clarity, and momentum. The deliberate choice to spend time with people who are building something, who are creating something, who are moving in a direction, is itself a form of environmental design. You absorb more from the people closest to you than you typically realize. Law 15. Crush your enemy totally. This is the law people most often read as evidence of the book's cruelty. But Greene is making a historical observation, not a moral prescription. A half-defeated enemy is a future threat. A rival who has been defeated, but not definitively so, retains both the motivation and the resentment to return. History is full of examples of victories that were not pressed to completion and returned as catastrophes later. The strategic implication in modern contexts is not literal destruction. It is the recognition that in real competitive situations, leaving room for an opponent to recover, regroup, and return means the conflict is not resolved. It is merely paused. Sometimes the cleaner outcome, even the kinder outcome in the long run, is a decisive resolution rather than a prolonged series of smaller confrontations. Law 40. Despise the free lunch. What is offered for free carries a hidden cost. This is one of Greene's clearest and most universally applicable observations. When something is given to you without any apparent cost, the question is not whether there is a cost. The question is what it is and when it will be collected. Sometimes the cost is obligation. Sometimes it is dependency. Sometimes it is the simple fact that the giver now believes they have a claim on you and on your loyalty. The person who insists on paying for what they receive, who avoids the tangled web of obligation that free gifts create, maintains a kind of independence that has real strategic value. They are not owned. They have not been positioned as grateful, and they have not surrendered any leverage in exchange for short-term convenience. This extends beyond literal gifts, favors, introductions, access, information. Everything that comes without an explicit price tag comes with an implicit one. Understanding that is the beginning of navigating generosity with intelligence rather than innocence. Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew. Every person has something they value above almost everything else. A fear, a desire, an insecurity, a dream. Something that, if you understand it and speak to it correctly, gives you a kind of access to their decision-making that nothing else provides. Greene is not describing manipulation in the cruel sense. He is describing the fundamental skill of understanding what actually drives people and the extraordinary leverage that understanding provides. Most people never develop this skill because they are too focused on their own perspective, their own needs, their own agenda, to truly pay attention to what is going on inside the people around them. The person who takes the time to understand what others truly value, what they truly fear, and what would make their life feel more like the life they want to live, has access to a kind of influence that does not require force or pressure. It requires understanding. And understanding, in the world Greene describes, is the foundation of all real power. Law 39. Stir up waters to catch fish. Anger and emotional agitation are not just uncomfortable states. In the world of power, they are vulnerabilities. The person who can be made angry, who can be provoked into a reaction, who loses their composure under pressure, reveals information they would not otherwise reveal, and makes decisions they would not otherwise make. And the corollary is equally important. The person who can remain calm when others around them are losing their composure occupies a position of significant advantage. They see clearly while others are blinded by emotion. They can think strategically while others are reacting instinctively. They can wait while others are rushing. Stirring up waters to catch fish means deliberately introducing turbulence into a situation in order to see what surfaces. What people say when they are angry. What they reveal when they are off balance. What they do when they feel threatened. These moments of agitation produce information that composed people guard carefully. We have now covered the psychology at the foundation of everything Greene teaches. The drives, the fears, the vanities, the insecurities that make human beings predictably irrational in ways that a careful observer can use. But all of this knowledge, all of this understanding is only as powerful as the time horizon you are willing to operate on. Which brings us to the theme that separates the tacticians from the strategists. Robert Greene is, above all things, a student of patience. Almost every law in the book, read carefully, is ultimately about the discipline of the long game, about the ability to absorb short-term discomfort, short-term obscurity, short-term defeat, in service of a much larger and much more durable outcome. Law 23. Concentrate your forces. The most common strategic error Greene observes across history is the dispersal of resources, trying to protect too many positions at once, pursuing too many objectives simultaneously, spreading effort so thin that no single front receives the concentration needed to produce a decisive result. The great strategists, military and otherwise, understood that concentration of force creates a quality of pressure that dispersed force never achieves. The same resources that produce no decisive result when spread across 5 objectives will achieve a breakthrough when focused entirely on one. This applies in careers as directly as in warfare. The person who tries to be excellent at 5 things simultaneously will almost always be outcompeted by the person who achieves real mastery at one. Not because the 5 pursuits are individually wrong, but because the depth required for real distinction, in almost any field, is only reached through the kind of concentrated, sustained effort that multiple competing priorities make impossible. Law 24. Play the perfect courtier. The ideal courtier, in Greene's historical analysis, is someone who has mastered the art of moving through hierarchical environments without making enemies, without creating unnecessary friction, and without sacrificing their own position or integrity. This involves a set of specific skills: the ability to flatter without being seen to flatter, the ability to adapt to the personality and preferences of the person in power without losing your own sense of self, the ability to handle criticism without becoming defensive and to handle praise without becoming complacent, the ability to be ambitious without being transparent about it. The perfect courtier succeeds not by fighting the environment they are in, but by mastering it, by understanding its rules so thoroughly that they can navigate it with an ease that appears almost effortless to those who are still struggling against it. Law 26. Keep your hands clean. In any situation where things go wrong, the person who is most protected is the one who has no visible connection to the decisions that produce the failure. This is not about evading responsibility in a moral sense. It is about the practical reality that blame, in most human environments, is assigned at least partly based on visibility rather than pure causal analysis. Greene's prescription is to use what he calls scapegoats and cat's paws, to ensure that when difficult or risky decisions are made, the execution is sufficiently distributed that no single failure point traces back directly to you. In more constructive terms, this law is about the wisdom of building structures and systems, rather than doing everything yourself, so that outcomes are not entirely dependent on your personal involvement at every level. Law 28. Enter action with boldness. Hesitation, Greene argues, creates more problems than boldness. The person who moves decisively, who commits fully to their chosen course of action, projects a confidence that often becomes self-fulfilling. People respond to boldness. They follow it. They get out of its way. Timidity, on the other hand, invites attack. The person who signals uncertainty through hesitation and half measures tells everyone around them that there is room to push back, room to negotiate, room to undermine. Boldness closes that room. It establishes the terms of engagement before opposition has a chance to organize. Greene is not advocating recklessness. He is making a point about the psychology of action. Once a decision is made, commitment to it produces better outcomes than perpetual reconsideration. The energy that goes into questioning a course already chosen is energy not going into executing it. Law 29. Plan all the way to the end. This is the law most people understand intellectually and almost nobody practices consistently. Most people plan to the point where they can see success. They map out the path to getting what they want and stop there. They do not think carefully about what happens after. Who will be displaced by their success? What new threats will emerge? What new responsibilities will arrive? What the second-order consequences of getting exactly what they wanted will turn out to be. Greene's historical examples are filled with people who won magnificently and then collapsed because they had planned for victory and not for the morning after. Planning to the end means asking not just how do I get there, but what happens when I do? Who is affected? What changes? What do I need to have prepared for the world that success will create, not just the world that currently exists? Law 34. Be royal in your own fashion. Act like a king to be treated like one. How you carry yourself determines, to a significant degree, how others treat you. Not entirely, not always, but to a degree that most people underestimate. The person who enters a room expecting to be taken seriously, who speaks as though their words have weight, who behaves as though their time is truly valuable, sets a different social expectation than the person who signals apology in their posture, their speech, and their manner. Greene is not describing arrogance. Arrogance is insecurity displaying itself loudly. What he is describing is a real internal conviction of one's own worth that expresses itself as natural dignity. The person who does not seek validation, who does not shrink to accommodate other people's comfort, who occupies their space in the world without apology, commands a kind of respect that no amount of formal achievement automatically provides. Law 36. Disdain things you cannot have. Ignoring them is the best revenge. Most people give power to the things they cannot have by visibly wanting them, by being seen to be affected by their absence, by allowing others to observe the desire and therefore understand the vulnerability. The person who masters indifference toward the things they cannot currently access holds a form of power that is difficult to understand until you have seen it in action. The rival who expected to provoke a response and got none. The person who expected to be chased and was not. The opportunity that was declined gracefully rather than grasped desperately. Indifference is not passivity. It is a form of power projection, and it is, in any competitive environment, one of the most unsettling responses you can deliver to someone who is hoping for a reaction. Law 45. Preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once. Change creates anxiety. Even people who say they want change tend to resist it when it arrives, because change means the loss of the familiar, the known, the predictable. And the loss of the familiar feels like a form of death to the part of the mind that organizes safety around continuity. The person who introduces change too rapidly, too completely, and without enough acknowledgement of what is being lost, generates resistance that is not really about the change itself. It is about the speed and the disregard for what came before. The most effective reformers throughout history, Greene observes, have understood the art of seeming continuity, of framing change in terms of preservation, of moving towards something new while appearing to honor the essential character of what already exists. The change happens, but it happens in a way that does not trigger the existential alarm that radical disruption always provokes. Law 48. Assume formlessness. This is the last law for a reason. It is the culmination of everything Greene has been building toward. Formlessness means adaptability. It means not committing so completely to any single identity, strategy, position, or approach that you cannot change when circumstances require it. Water, Greene writes, is the perfect model for power. It has no fixed shape. It takes the shape of whatever contains it. It finds the path of least resistance, and it erodes the hardest rock, not through force, but through persistence and adaptability across time. The person who is too attached to a particular image of themselves, too committed to a particular strategy, too rigid in their identity, becomes predictable. And predictability, as we discussed in Part 4, is a vulnerability. But formlessness is not shapelessness. The river has a direction, even if its path is not fixed. The person who assumes formlessness still has values, goals, and principles. They simply hold them in a way that allows for constant adaptation in how those things are expressed and pursued. This is Greene's deepest argument, that the most dangerous thing in any competitive environment is rigidity, and the most powerful thing is the ability to change form completely while the core remains intact. It is also, and this is what makes the law profound rather than just clever, a kind of wisdom about how to survive the passage of time itself. People change. Circumstances change. Opportunities appear in forms nobody predicted. The person who can move with those changes, who is not shackled to a version of themselves that no longer fits the moment, has a resilience that goes beyond any specific tactic or law. There is one final cluster of laws that sits slightly apart from strategy and timing and human nature. It operates in a more intimate register, between people rather than above or below them. And it is the layer of the book that is most often misunderstood. There is a layer of the book that goes beyond strategy and into something more intimate. Something that operates not in the arena of formal power, but in the space between people. The space where attention is captured, loyalty is built, and influence is generated not through force or position, but through something much harder to name and much harder to defend against. Greene calls it seduction, and he uses that word in its broadest sense. Not romantic seduction, though that is one dimension of it, but the deeper process by which one person captures the imagination and the attention of another so completely that resistance dissolves. Law 43. Work on the hearts and minds of others. Force can compel behavior, but it cannot compel loyalty. Threats can produce compliance, but they cannot produce honest commitment. The person who wins through force will always need more force to maintain what they have won, because the resentment of the compelled never disappears. It waits. The person who wins through the hearts and minds of others, who creates authentic belief, authentic enthusiasm, authentic attachment, holds something far more durable. Because people who honestly believe in something do not need to be monitored. They do not need to be threatened. They want to be part of it. This is why the great leaders of history, the ones whose influence lasted beyond their immediate presence, were not primarily strategists. They were communicators. They understood what people needed to believe, what story people needed to tell themselves about their own purpose and their own lives, and they gave them that story in a way that felt not like imposition, but like revelation. Law 44. Disarm and infuriate with the mirror effect. When you mirror the behavior of another person, reflecting their own actions and attitudes back at them, several things happen simultaneously. They see themselves from the outside for the first time. The strategy or tactic they were using becomes visible to them when they encounter it deployed against them. And the mirror creates a kind of unsettling intimacy that is very difficult to resist or counter. The mirror effect works because most people are not fully conscious of what they are doing. They are operating on instinct, habit, and pattern. When that pattern is reflected back to them with perfect accuracy, it produces a moment of recognition that can disarm even the most guarded person. Law 27. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following. People want to believe. This is one of the most fundamental observations about human nature in the entire book, and one of the most important to understand. The world is uncertain. The future is opaque. Individual human life is often confusing, painful, and without obvious meaning. And into that uncertainty, the person who offers a clear vision, a compelling narrative, a community of shared purpose, touches something so deep and so powerful that logic alone cannot counter it. This is not an instruction to start a cult. It is an observation about the psychological dynamics of belief and community. The most influential figures in any domain, whether political, religious, commercial, or cultural, have always understood that what people hunger for is not just practical benefit. They hunger for meaning, for belonging, for a sense that they are part of something larger than themselves. The person who can provide that feeling, honestly and in service of something worth believing in, has a kind of influence that practical achievement alone never generates. Law 30. Make your accomplishments seem effortless. When people see others working hard, they see the effort, and effort reminds them of difficulty, of struggle, of the possibility of failure. Hard work, visibly displayed, can generate respect, but it can also generate a sense of the limits of capability. When people see others succeed with apparent ease, they see capability. They see a quality that seems natural rather than acquired. They project onto that effortlessness a kind of innate superiority that has far more power over the imagination than the image of someone who is working as hard as they are. The great performers in every field, from musicians to athletes to executives, eventually learn to make the difficult look easy, not to diminish the effort involved, but because the concealment of effort is itself part of the performance. The visible struggle distracts from the result. The apparent effortlessness allows the result to speak for itself. Law 41. Avoid stepping into a great man's shoes. If you follow in the wake of someone who is enormously successful, you face a problem that has nothing to do with your actual capability. The comparison will always be unfavorable. People remember the predecessor at their best. They will evaluate you against an idealized memory that you can never match. The person who inherits a successful position must find a way to differentiate themselves, to create their own identity and their own legacy, rather than spending their energy trying to replicate or honor the predecessor. You cannot out-Napoleon Napoleon. You can only be whoever you actually are. This means that sometimes the best strategy upon inheriting greatness is to change direction, to introduce new priorities and new standards in ways that make the comparison less direct. Not to dishonor what came before, but to make clear that what comes next is something entirely new, to be judged on its own terms. Law 46. Never appear too perfect. Perfection creates distance. It also creates enemies. The person who appears to have no flaws, no vulnerabilities, no moments of uncertainty or failure becomes an object of resentment rather than admiration. Human beings are social animals who bond through shared imperfection. The admission of a flaw, the acknowledgement of a real difficulty, the moment of visible humanity in someone who otherwise seems formidable, produces a warmth and a connection that flawlessness never can. Greene's observation is subtle but important. The person who appears too perfect invites people to look for the cracks, because the conviction that perfection cannot be real is deep in human psychology, and the person who seems to offer no cracks becomes, paradoxically, more vulnerable than the person who admits to a few. Law 47. Do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, know when to stop. Success creates momentum, and momentum creates its own logic, its own gravitational pull toward more. The person who wins a significant victory feels the energy of that win, pushing them forward into further action, further expansion, further aggression. And this is exactly when some of the greatest disasters in history have occurred. Napoleon, who had conquered most of Europe, pushed into Russia. Alexander, having built an empire stretching from Greece to India, kept going. In both cases, the momentum of previous success created the illusion that the next step was simply a continuation of what had been working. It was not. Knowing when to stop, when to consolidate, when to convert momentum into lasting position rather than using it for the next gamble, requires a kind of discipline that success makes difficult to access. Because the same boldness that produced the victory argues against stopping. And the rational argument for stopping is easily drowned out by the emotional high of winning. Greene's lesson is one of the most difficult in the book to implement, precisely because it requires you to act against the feeling of success. To treat a moment of maximum power as a moment for caution rather than expansion, and to understand that the line between decisive victory and catastrophic overreach is often visible only in retrospect. We need to spend a moment here because it would be dishonest not to. The 48 Laws of Power makes many people uncomfortable. It should. Not because the observations are wrong, but because they are right. And the world they describe is more competitive and more strategically complex than most of us would prefer to believe. Greene has been criticized for writing a book that could be used by manipulative, power-hungry people to cause harm. That criticism is not entirely without merit. Almost any book about how power works can be used by people with bad intentions. But the more important point is this: the dynamics Greene describes exist whether you read this book or not. Power operates whether you understand it or not. The people around you who have studied these dynamics, whether through Greene or through experience or through instinct, are navigating the world with an understanding you do not have if you choose to remain ignorant of it. Greene's intention, stated clearly in the book, is not to create a generation of manipulators. It is to create a generation of aware people. People who can recognize when a law is being used on them. People who can understand why they keep ending up in situations that feel unfair. People who can navigate the actual world rather than the world they wish existed. Reading this book does not make you Machiavellian. Not reading it does not make you moral. It simply leaves you without a map and territory where everyone else is navigating. What you choose to do with the understanding is, as always, your own decision. So what is the 48 Laws of Power actually saying, underneath all the historical examples and individual laws? The world runs on power dynamics that most people never explicitly study and therefore never fully understand. Talent, hard work, and good intentions are necessary but not sufficient. The person who also understands how power actually operates in any competitive human environment has a significant advantage over the person who does not. Appearances are not superficial. They are the substance of perception, and perception shapes how every action you take is interpreted. Managing how you are seen is not vanity. It is intelligence. Every organization is a court. The dynamics of alliance, rivalry, favor, and reputation that played out in the courts of history play out in every workplace, every institution, every social structure. Understanding those dynamics is the beginning of navigating them. Information about the people around you, what they actually want, what they actually fear, how they actually make decisions, is one of the most powerful assets you can accumulate. The person who truly understands others has leverage that does not require force. Timing is a discipline, not an accident. The ability to read when the moment is right and to have the patience to wait for it separates the strategically intelligent from the merely talented. Human nature is consistent. The drives, fears, and desires that motivated people in ancient Rome and Renaissance Florence are the same ones motivating people in your workplace and your industry today. The person who understands that consistency can navigate human situations with a clarity that seems almost prescient to those who do not. The long game always wins. The ability to absorb short-term setbacks, to protect your reputation across time, to plan further into the future than your opponents, and to remain adaptable as circumstances change, is the quality that separates temporary success from durable power. And influence that works through the hearts and minds of others, that creates honest belief and lasting loyalty, is more durable and more powerful than influence created through force, fear, or formal authority. Robert Greene did not write this book to tell you how to be ruthless. He wrote it to show you how the world actually works, and to give you the choice, the informed, aware choice of how you want to move through it. Because the alternative is not innocence, it is ignorance, and ignorance in a world where others understand what you do not is its own kind of vulnerability. And that is everything from the 48 Laws of Power today on Bookmark. If this is the kind of learning that works for you, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below telling us which book you want us to explain next. We read every single one. See you on the next one.